It's worth talking about cannabinoids and terpenes. They're the two most abundant and widely discussed classes of chemical compounds found in cannabis, although not the only ones. So starting with cannabinoids, because they're the most familiar and probably the most consequential for the effects, right? THC, CBD, these are the things that one will likely be familiar with. These compounds are cannabinoids, so they are plant cannabinoids. If they're in cannabis, they're coming from the plant, and they're cannabinoids because they belong to a class of compounds that is similar to endogenous compounds in our own body called endocannabinoids. And so these things tend to interact in various ways with our endocannabinoid system, which is simply a receptor system in the body, one of many. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here because we could spend a lot of time on that. But these are compounds that just have chemical properties such that they interact with the endocannabinoid system in some way. They're non-volatile. So when you smell cannabis, you're not smelling the cannabinoids. THC and CBD don't have the right chemical properties to float into the air and into your nose. But they are psychoactive. Both THC and CBD are psychoactive. Some of the other minor cannabinoids, which are very minor and very rare, as we showed in our paper in commercial cannabis, might also be psychoactive as well. They have a variety of effects, and there's a lot of stuff out there that you can go read on that. But that's one class of compounds. There's a different class of closely related compounds, so sort of like a sister class of compounds. So they share certain properties with the cannabinoids, but they are a separate class. And those are the terpenes or terpenoids. You'll hear both terms, and they're approximately interchangeable. And terpenes are actually, you could almost think of them as like a chemical language that plants use to communicate with the outside world. So these are among the most abundant biomolecules found in nature, especially in the plant world. More or less any plant that you've ever smelled in your life, what you're smelling there, at least in part, is terpenes. So they often have names like pinene. So the smell of pine needles comes largely from a terpene called pinene. There's different forms of pinene. The smell of lemons comes, at least in part, from another terpene called limonene. And there are literally, hundreds and hundreds of terpenes out there in the world. If you go walk through the woods, you're just walking through an invisible cloud of terpenes. And if you smell a flower, you're really smelling the terpenes. The reason that they have all of these distinctive smells is that the plant is really, if you were to anthropomorphize the plant world, you might say that the plants are intending to release these compounds in order to say something to animals. That might be to humans, that might be to bugs, and bees and things. Oftentimes it's the things that might want to eat the plant. So a lot of these compounds serve a defensive function for the plant. They often have insecticidal or, some kind of aversive quality to them that sends a signal to insects, for example, that says, don't eat me, more or less. They might attract other things that will help to defend the plant from those other critters. But the way they do that is they basically travel through the air, or they come in contact with a bug or an animal somehow, and they have chemical properties such that they interface with receptors in that animal. And oftentimes that includes receptors in the nervous system. So, the plant is not really evolved to get humans high or attract humans, arguably. But what it has evolved to do is repel insects and things that might want to eat it. And as just a natural side effect of making these compounds for that reason, these compounds, many of them, bind to receptors in the nervous system. And so in the context of a mammal like a human, these things can have psychoactive or medicinal effects. They probably have modulatory effects on some of these other compounds. And the basic idea is these plants aren't making one thing, they're actually making a whole set of compounds. They usually make dozens and dozens of these things, like a whole bouquet of them. And the reason for that is that plants can't move. And so unlike animals, they can't run away from their problems. So they deal with them pharmaceutically, essentially. So they don't have an immune system like we do with cells that go around and eat bacteria. These things often have antibacterial or antifungal properties as well. Plants a huge problem for plants and for cannabis growers is mildew, for example. So a lot of these terpenes, are helping the plant in that way, combat mildew or mold. But anyways, these plants often have a particular profile. So any two strains of cannabis, any two plants out in the world, flowers, trees, whatever, they tend to have a chemical signature that defines that species or that subspecies. And that signature is tied to that plant simply because that's the combination of compounds that's most suitable for that plant species or subspecies to, protect itself and just survive out in the world. And that's why you have a diversity of terpene profiles, for example, that you see in different types of cannabis. You can imagine cannabis out in the wild, if you're in the Hindu Kush region of the Middle East versus in, Central or South America versus in, Southeast Asia, you have a different habitat, you have different physical conditions that you're living in, and you've got different organisms that are trying to eat you or compete with you. And so the particular environment the plant finds itself in means that it's going to have a particular set of chemical compounds like cannabinoids and terpenes that will be best able to help protect that plant.